Hi everyone. This video will look at how we can set up an API gateway service. First of all, what is an API gateway service? So I have just updated the general microservices diagram which we have been looking into. So now we have already looked into the discovery server, config server, Git repo, and the services which are linked to, these two services which help us in managing our services better with respect to discovery and configuration. Now, the third very important thing which we want to talk about is the API gateway service. Now, why is it required? As you can see in the diagram, you know, it is acting as a single point of contact for the different clients which are trying to make a call to our application. You know, now a particular client may want to call inventory service at some point in time, or may want to call product service, uh, you know, at some other part in the user interface. Okay, so and remember that these services could be running at different ports, and multiple instances of these services may be running. So imagine the number of instances which we may need to keep a track of, or the client may need to keep a track of if they were trying to call these services or these instances directly. That is why we have API gateway where the client can just tell which service they are looking for, and rest of the process as to which instance and which port uh, is applicable for that service is decided by API gateway. And API gateway generally gets that information from the discovery server as to what all instances of a particular service are up and running, and so on and so forth. So this is the general idea why we require an API gateway. Okay, and as we always do, we are also trying to get some inspiration from ChatGPT as to what it is telling with respect to the advantages of API gateway. So let's quickly look at that. So, uh, it helps us in authentication and authorization, which means that you need not put authorization and authentication, at each service, separately. So you can just centralize the authentication and authorization, because the entry point has now become one. That is, there is only a single point of entry for all the calls which are being made by your clients. By client, I mean the UI code. Okay. So you can do the authentication authorization at one place inside the API gateway, and then it helps in rate limiting, which is nothing but related to a number of API requests per unit time, which is allowed for that particular application. So these are few things which you can configure at the API gateway level itself. And IP whitelisting, blacklisting. So we'll not go into each point in detail. We just look at the important points. And then obviously it helps us in centralized routing and load balancing. So API gateways can distribute incoming requests across multiple instances, as I already mentioned, improving tolerance and optimizing resource utilization. So it also helps us in load balancing. And it routes incoming requests to the appropriate backend service based on the request path, okay, which would contain the service name, generally, method headers or other criteria. Okay, so client need not know the port, the instances for a particular service. And then there are other advantages like service aggregation, which if you want, you can read more about. Uh, Improved client experience, cross-cutting concerns management, uh, scalability, as we already saw, that it helps us in load balancing. Okay, and then there is one point related to service discovery and fault tolerance. Now, API gateway can work with the service registry, as I mentioned, to dynamically route requests to available service instances as services scale up and down. Okay, so basically it helps us in dynamic routing. And then it helps us in fault tolerance by implementing circuit breaker patterns. You can prevent various failures in the microservices architecture. So in this video we'll look at how we can set up an API gateway service, and how without knowing the port we can call the two services which we have, that is the product and inventory service, just with their name. Okay, and then internally the API gateway in your production environment can route to an available instance of that service, and so on and so forth. Okay, so let's quickly go to the code. We have this product service which is basically running on port 8003, if you remember from the last video, and we have this inventory service running on port 8002. And don't worry about these ports, because as you remember, the configuration from the config repo are overwriting the configuration in the local file. Okay, so just to quickly check, so this is about the inventory service. It is getting the latest config from the config repo, and this is about the product service. So both are up and running on port 8002 and 8003. Okay, and obviously you have the discovery server which is up, and the config server which is also running. So next what I'll do is I'll quickly go to the Spring initializer and create one service. So we have the Spring initializer. I have put the name of the service we want to create. Other things remain the same. We are selecting Maven as our build and dependency management tool. We are going to add Spring Gateway, Spring Cloud Routing Gateway as one of the dependencies, and also we want it to be a discovery client. Okay, so these are the two dependencies I'm adding. Let's generate the application. Let's quickly extract that, and let's quickly open that application as well. So it will take some time to load the dependencies. Let it resolve the dependencies. So we have those dependencies resolved. What we need to add here is uh, we want it to be available as a discovery client by the discovery server. That is one thing. Second thing is I want to give it a port. It's great one. Okay, as we saw in that diagram. And I think that's about it. Let's quickly run this application as well. Okay, so it is up and running on port 8081. Let's quickly check uh, if we have this available in our discovery server. So API gateway is also registered now. Okay. Uh, so this we have already seen that we have these two services, product and inventory, running on port 8003 and 8002 respectively. Okay. So let's try calling the home page URL of product service with API gateway. So what we are going to do is I need to give the name of the service, after the root URL of the API gateway. Okay. Hopefully the name of the service is correct. It's product service only. 081. Yes. Yes. So guys, couple of things we were doing wrong, which I've corrected now. One thing is the dependency which we should have added uh, in your API gateway was Spring Cloud Starter Gateway. Okay. But we had included Spring Cloud Starter Gateway MVC. Okay. That is one thing which you need to change. So if you remember, we selected this first dependency, but we should have selected the reactive gateway dependency. Okay. Then we selected the first one. It basically selected the Spring Gateway MVC dependency, which will basically not work. Okay. So I have got it working with the Spring Cloud Starter Gateway dependency. Okay. And obviously we included the Eureka client dependency. We don't require any other dependency currently for the API gateway. Okay. So this is the first thing. Second thing which we didn't include in application.properties was the routes configuration. Okay. So in your API gateway, you have to provide details related to the service name and the route. Okay. Um, so that depending on that route, the API gateway can understand that, okay, this route corresponds to this service. So I need to route this request to this service. Okay. So let me quickly explain what each particular configuration means here. Okay. First thing is these two need to be true. We want to register with Eureka as a client, and fetch registry that also has to be true. And obviously we can give an application name, and port we are running currently is 8080 in our local. The first configuration with respect to route is the ID, which is a unique name for that route. Okay. So in this case, I have named it as inventory service route. Second is the URI, where you need to give LB colon, LB means load balancer colon / name of the service. This here corresponds to the name of the service which you have provided for that service. So it should exactly match that name. Please remember this thing. So if I go to inventory service, I have given the same name here, the spring.application name. Okay. And the third thing is the predicates of 0, which means the path we want to map this particular service to. So in other words, it means if I give path / if the path contains /inventory -service, it corresponds to the inventory service. Okay. And please don't confuse this, that they need to be of the same name. Here I could have easily made it inventory. Okay. And it would still work. Okay. Let me show you that. I can show that to you in just a bit. Okay. But I've just made it inventory service. Okay. So this was about the predicates parameter. So these 4 route configuration you can find in the GitHub code link, which I will provide, and also from ChatGPT. Okay. So you just need to, ask, provide me the Spring Cloud gateway route configuration parameters, and it will give you these 4 parameters. An explanation also it will give you, but since I'm explaining, so anyway you would understand what we are referring to here. The fourth one is stripping the prefix, which means it will strip the prefix inventory service. So when you provide inventory service in your URL, it will strip that service and directly route to the inventory service, the name you are providing, to its root URL. Okay. I'll also explain this particular uh, property to you very clearly. So currently, let's first see what we have running. Okay. By the way, what I did is I have completely stopped the config server. Okay. I have stopped the product service. There are only two services which are running and registered with your Eureka server or discovery server, which is the inventory service and the API gateway service. Okay. And let's quickly check what dependency we have for inventory service. Inventory service would obviously contain the dependencies it requires. That is, maybe it requires JPA related dependency. Obviously, there has to be a Eureka client dependency because we want it to be a client of the discovery server. So you have the data REST, starter web, actuator to know the to do the health check of the microservice or to refresh the configuration without restarting the service. So all these configurations, we have it with the service. Okay. And just for simplicity, I have stopped the config server. So it will take the properties from the local application.properties file. Okay. But this particular whole flow will work with the config server also. What you need to do is once you start the config server, you have to restart your API gateway service once and your inventory service also once. Okay. And then it will take the properties, inventory service will take the properties from your uh, centralized config. And when you call the inventory service via the API gateway, it will also behave the same way, that it will just route the request to the inventory service, and inventory service in turn will take the config from your centralized config. So that will anyway work. Okay. So just for simplicity, I have removed the config server from here. Okay. So now let's first see whether we have the current thing working or not. So let me go to the first, let us check it with our local uh, inventory service. So it is basically pointing to port 8012. Okay. And let's quickly go to the inventory controller. So I have mapped it to the root endpoint. Okay. So the root endpoint should give me this information. Okay. From the local after reading from the local application.properties file. Okay. See, this is working. So it is getting the service.info parameter and the port from the local application.properties file. Okay, which is great. So our inventory service is up and running. And also make sure that both these services are registered on your Eureka server. So as we see, we have inventory service registered on port 8012 and we have the epicenter API gateway service registered on port 8080. Okay, so make sure that this is also happening. Now, the most important thing, we have to check whether the API gateway is able to route that request to the inventory service when we give this particular endpoint. So here I am pointing to the API gateway service by giving port 8080 and then slash inventory service uh, because that is the route we have mentioned in its property file, that if we see inventory service in the route, then you route it to the inventory service microservice. Okay. And because of the strip uh, filter also, it will strip inventory service and route it to the root endpoint of inventory service. So let's see if this is working. I'm just refreshing in front of you. I'm just refreshing a couple of times and you see that it is working. Okay. So the issue we were facing is resolved now. Our API gateway is up and running. With the help of the route configuration we have mentioned here, we are able to route it to the inventory service. Okay. Hope you appreciate this. Okay. This is very important. Now let me show you that this will work, you know, by giving any path. So it strips the uh, 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 first sort of sub URL which is coming here. Okay, so it will strip the inventory now. So it wants you to give inventory in the URL, and then the filters uh, configuration strips that and directly routes it to the home endpoint of inventory service. So let me quickly save this file and restart this service in front of you. Okay, and we'll see this in action as well to make it absolutely clear to you guys. Okay. And once this is up and running, give it some time because it takes some time for it to get registered with the Eureka server. So Eureka server needs to, you know, get the updated version of your API gateway. Okay. So now what I'll do is I'll just give a inventory here and not inventory service, and it will recognize it as the path which should point to the inventory service. See, this is working. It is routing to the inventory service root URL. Now, if I give inventory dash service, it will not work. This will give you an error because it is not recognizing that path. We changed the path. Okay. So these two properties are very important. This path corresponds to this service where this is the service name and this is the path. Okay. Now, as I was mentioning, I'll also show you that you can do this without stripping the URL also. In that case, it will not strip the URL and push the request directly and expect your API to handle that request. Okay. So in that case, what we need to do is I am removing this strip prefix property. Okay. Let's rerun this service. On the other hand, we also need to do one more thing here in inventory controller. Instead of this, being expecting an empty or root URL, it will, we need to give here the inventory as the starting point so that it can map to the URL we are giving here in API gateway. Okay, so this URL points to this service. Anything which contains inventory and anything after inventory will point to this service. Okay, and since we didn't strip the URL, so it directly pushes the request or routes the same request to the inventory service. So inventory service should be in a position to handle that request with /inventory. Okay, so if you don't want to strip, then you need to give that prefix here. Okay, hope you understood what we need to do to get this working. Okay, so let's rerun this service with the /inventory in place as a prefix in the inventory controller. Okay, but ideally you want to strip that prefix so that it starts from the root endpoint. Okay, it just routes it to that service, and then that service the endpoint starts from the root URL and not any prefix. Okay, this is also running. Let's quickly now check on the inventory. Okay, first let's check whether this is working or not. It is still not working. 8012 slash inventory. Okay. I think one mistake we did here. Rerun this. Okay. It started on port 8012. Okay. Let's check with this one. Yes. So when I gave this as the starting point and get mapping as slash inv, you know, uh, first we can check on the microservice directly that that endpoint is getting called, and then via the gateway whether uh, it is routing correctly to the right endpoint. Okay, so we saw that it is now working without stripping the prefix also, but ideally we want to strip the prefix so that uh, the API gateway can understand from the route which service we are talking about and route it to the home endpoint of that service. So we need not put a prefix there in that service. Okay, that's a better way of doing it. Okay, so in this particular video we saw how we can set up an API gateway, and we were able to route a particular service by giving the configured URL path which corresponds to that service in the URL. And we saw that how the API gateway was able to route it to the right endpoint in that service. So hope this particular video was informative. A lot of hard work has gone into creating these tutorials. So I would recommend that you also practice on the go and make this tutorial a success for yourself. So until the next video, uh, I wish you a very happy learning. Thank you very much. Hope you like the video. For the code, link is there in the description. And if you need any help in building large scale software solutions or AI automation solutions, you can get on a quick consultation call. Again, link is there in the description. So until next time, like, subscribe, and share. And I'll see you in the next one. Thank you.